Hello everyone, and welcome to what will be the first in a series of panel discussions covering the highlights or big takeaways from each chapter of the Leader in Me text, which hopefully is familiar to all of you. We recognize that the preparation stage for our Leader in Me journey has been extended essentially for an entire year because of COVID-19 and the pandemic. So we want to take this opportunity to revisit some of the systems pieces that really make this implementation really pretty different than other implementations that we've experienced in the past. A typical resource adoption often includes training on how to use the teacher manual, training on navigating the online resources, guidance and recommendations about the number of minutes to teach a component of a lesson, and all of those components will be here and will still be part of this implementation. But in our work with Franklin Covey up to this point in preparing for full implementation, it's really become very clear that those sort of process or technical components of this implementation are really not what will make it successful. What really will make this implementation successful is how our beliefs and our practices as adults really impact the kind of transformational change that this implementation is capable of bringing if we invest the time. In August of 2021, all staff will receive 2 full days of Leader in Me training. This training will include opportunities for you to access direct student lessons, time for you to explore and begin planning how you'll use online resources from the portal. But the majority of the time really will be spent on internalizing and learning the 7 habits. When Leader in Me trainers and staff in Leader in Me schools say things to me like, "It will really change everything you do," the skeptic in me kind of says, what does that really mean? And I completed earlier this week a full day training of what was called Quick Start training, very identical to what all of you will experience this fall. And it was all around the 7 habits. Full disclosure, it was hard. The self-reflective pieces of this implementation are difficult. One, because it really required me to sort of examine sort of my individual beliefs, both personally and professionally. And to add a layer of difficulty to that, no one was telling me how I was going to fix it. I had to come up with that on my own. In other words, no one was going to just tell me what to do, which made it a little more difficult. So recognizing how important opening ourselves up to this kind of self-reflective thinking and collaboration is to make this implementation successful, we're bringing together a panel of staff from across the district to include both certified and non-certified staff to really talk about some of the key components or key concepts from the Leader in Me text to maintain or maybe reestablish some of the momentum around Leader in Me and the Leader in Me implementation across our district. Some chapters warrant standing alone, kind of like chapter 1, which we're going to spend some time discussing today. Some chapters lend themselves to being blended together. So some of the panel discussions may cover 2 or 3 chapters at one time. The purpose of these discussions really is to be a springboard for principals and for Leader in Me coaches and all staff to think about these key concepts, reflect on some of the questions that we pose, and how those will impact your effectiveness, both on a personal and on a professional level. So that's our purpose here today. For that to happen, we're going to assemble a panel of staff over the next several weeks to come together to discuss these key concepts and hopefully allow all of you back at buildings as grade levels or departments to continue your personal and professional Leader in Me journeys. As educators, we wear a lot of different hats. And in my Franklin Covey training earlier this week, they said, this work really requires educators to put on your self hat. You really have to think about why you do what you do and how that impacts how we do it. So to begin this conversation, I brought together a group of esteemed educators from across the district. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves now before we start in on some of our discussion questions. So if we could start with just your name, where you work, and your role in the district. If we could start here with Jenna.
So my name is Jenna Troy. I'm a school counselor at John Muir.
Thanks, Jenna.
I'm Jen Davidson, and I teach 5th grade at Thomas Jefferson.
I'm Joelle Witter. I'm a 4th grade teacher at Thomas Elementary School.
I'm Michael Close. I'm an English teacher at Wausau West.
I'm Renee Groshek. I am a science teacher at Wausau West.
Great. Thank you all for being here today. One of the big one of the big key concepts from chapter 1 is this idea of engagement. So I'd like to explore that a little bit. In the first chapter, we meet the Patel family who've just relocated to Raleigh, North Carolina, and they're looking for a school where they're going to send their kids. They visit several of them. In the beginning pages of the book, they talk about when just entering the doors of A.B. Combs Elementary, it was an engaging experience. It's a really powerful word. Let's talk about that a little bit. Think about your own school. What word would you use to describe your own school and why? Joelle, how about if you start out?
Sure, yeah. One word that I think of when I think of Grand Elementary is welcoming. No matter what your background is or what family you are, we welcome you and we want you to come into our school, and we have smiles on our faces, and we will direct you to whatever you need, and want you to know that whatever questions you have, we will get them for you. We have bulletin boards that are colorful. We want friends and families and students to know that we have, welcoming signs, and we just want them to know that they are valuable to our school and that we want them to be a part of our school as well.
How about some perspective from secondary? How about Mike?
I can speak to this. This is my 5th year in the Wausau Public School District, and when I interviewed 5 years ago, essentially, and I entered Wausau West High School, and I met with Jeb Steckbauer and John Mossens and interviewed for the position, it was different than any other school I had been in up to that point in time. And what initially struck me was just the friendliness. And then after my interview, I toured the building with John, and I was just, well, one, there were no bells, and this, which was a different concept in and of itself from anything I had experienced in the past. And just the level of kindness, friendliness, and respect that I saw from students who were passing in the hallways at many different times. The flex mod schedule will, unless you've experienced it, it will catch you off guard the first time, and when you sit down and look at it, it will fluster you. But once you see it in the process, and it was very easy for me when I left the building that day, having been given an offer of the position, knowing that I was going to accept it when I got home and sat down and thought about it, because never had I been in a building where I was like, yeah, I really want to be in this building.
That gave me a little bit of a chill, actually. Renee, how about you?
I'm going to add on to that I think at Wausau West with the FlexMod system, the kids are empowered to take charge of their own learning. And if they take that opportunity to, hey, I have this 20-minute chunk of time off, I'm going to go search out the science teacher or a science teacher to get help on this. I think that's why it is that welcoming kind of building, because we're like, we trust you to make good decisions about your education. And I think that's an empowering thing for kids.
Great, thank you. This concept of engagement is pretty important as we begin our Leader in Me journey, just recognizing that if we all can personally define what engagement looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like to us, then we can begin to build consensus and come to some common understanding of that vocabulary as building level teams, as departments, as grade levels. It's difficult to begin to create an engaging environment if we can't define what that should look, feel, and sound like. So I appreciate the insights in terms of how you describe your schools at this point. They described A.B. Combs Elementary as a school filled with respectful and confident students, an engaged staff, a school with strong test scores, a principal of the year. It's a stark contrast oftentimes to the stories that we hear about schools that are inundated with bullying, rude manners, low test scores, lack of respect and discipline among students. It truly does seem like it's too good to be true. What about, if anything, makes you skeptical about how A.B. Combs is described in these initial pages of Chapter 1? Jen, what do you think?
When we look at it, it does seem too good to be true. How can we have strong leadership and engaged staff and our students taking charge? But I think it's possible. I think with everybody coming together and the whole school, we can do this. And I've seen it.
Great. Thank you. Jenna, what about at middle school? Anything about that description in Chapter 1 that makes you think, that seems a little too good to be true.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of big changes that they talk about, and I think to kind of echo what Jen said as well, I think that, like, I've seen all these different pieces throughout our building of this amazing transformation that is possible because there's so many things in each of our buildings, and I can speak to John Muir. There's so many people and there's so many systems that have that spark and that magic. And I think just building on that in a program like this is just an incredible opportunity. So yeah, I was reading and I had some reservations myself just because can one thing make this big of a difference? But I think all these schools that are discussed in this book are great examples of how this program really can make a big impact in a building. And we know we have the people to make it happen, so I think I'm certainly really excited about it.
Great, thanks, Jenna. One other key concept, or big rock, if you will, which is what they like to describe them as in the Franklin Covey world, in this chapter is this idea of paradigms. A paradigm is described or defined in the book as a map of how we see the world, how we see a person, a place, or a situation, likened to how many might define our unconscious or implicit bias. On page 8, there's a quote from Albert Einstein that really resonated with me. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created those problems. What might be gained from stepping back and examining the paradigms or beliefs that we hold that drive why and how we do what we do in schools? What do you think? Let's start with Mike with that one.
This seems to be a conversation that we're almost having on a daily basis right now in the midst of COVID. And, there's a quote that's been going around a lot. You heard it during a lot of these situations. And I know Rahm Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago and once Department of Education, had said it. And he's not the person who said it originally, but the idea of never letting a good crisis go to waste. And I think right now, with bringing Leader in Me into the school district, and I'm very happy to know that we're pushing the training back. And the idea that we're going through an extraordinary time where we are in the midst of a paradigm shift, that we are learning what works and what doesn't work in virtual education. We're learning how we need to better prepare our students for the adversity that they're facing. We're seeing all these great things, and I know that how education is going to be 2 years down the road is going to be completely different than it was on March 11th, 2020. And so I really like this idea because, going back to the Einstein quote where we're thinking about, we can't do that. We have to come up with a lot more creative stuff. And this is one of the questions I know that comes up later is a whole lot of imagination. And I know that a lot of us probably are going to go home tonight on a Friday, and we have exhausted a whole lot of our imagination. And so we'll have to spend the weekend recuperating that. But I think this is like a really essential thing to be looking at is the shift in the paradigm and the opportunity we have to really embrace the shift.
Great, thanks, Mike. Jen, what about your thoughts on that? What comes from sort of stepping back and examining some of those paradigms?
I think when we are able to step back and we have a culture at our school with the staff, we're able to talk to each other about our thoughts. And having those conversations really helps people see where maybe they need to take a shift, because we don't always see that in ourselves, but building those relationships with your staff and your students helps everybody step back together. And you're not doing it alone. It is a group effort. And sometimes we need to have those conversations with parents too. And I feel like with Leader in Me, we talk about the whole school. And it's the parents, it's the kids, it's the teachers, that we all have to embrace this paradigm shift together.
Right. And it kind of connects to that whole idea of creating the time and the space to start those conversations builds that collective efficacy that we recognize is so important because we realize we're all rowing in the same direction and what we're doing collectively is making a difference. Renee, anything to add to
Yeah,
that?
I was going to say that this is not just another thing. We could adopt a different reading program or a different math program or whatever, and nothing's going to change the outcome that we're seeing unless we go to that next level. So the idea that we can't think at the same level as where we made the problem, if we just think about changing curricula, that doesn't solve the problem of low test scores or something. We have to go the step above, and this paradigm shift is just that. We are another level up, where we can look down and reflect on, those changes that we could make, but do we really need to? Or is it, we need to be more engaged, we need to increase their leadership opportunities, or whatever it is, in what we already have, and just change the way we think about or implement those things, and the engagement that we have across the board. And I think I'd like to add the community to that list that you're saying. So, not just the teachers and the students and the administration. We need to have the parents on board, and we need to have the community on board, including businesses and the grandparents and the college kids, whatever, that we get everybody engaged in this paradigm shift of leadership opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you. Some really, really incredible insights. Chapter 1 concludes with sharing 3 overarching themes, and Mike, you referenced this question was coming. Here it is. To watch and listen for throughout the book. Whole school, a whole person, and a whole lot of imagination. Why do you feel, based on what you currently know about Leader in Me, that each of these 3 elements will be important to remember as we view the content of this text and begin our Leader in Me journey as a district over the next several weeks? Jenna, how about if we start with you?
Well, I think it really echoes what we're working on in WASA with the whole child concept. And I see this work every single day in my job as a school counselor. I think it's just a great opportunity to look at the whole student. So we all know that if a kiddo is struggling because they're hungry at home or they don't have a place to sleep, they're not going to be able to ace that math test no matter how well they've prepared. And I think that this book and this chapter especially really highlights the fact that kiddos need more than just, a simple math instruction. They need the opportunity to show those skills that we see that they need on a daily basis in the real world. And I think that by focusing on those things as a district, we have an opportunity to give students something that's so valuable for their future, and that's what makes me so excited about Leader in Me.
Great. Thanks, Jenna. And I think it's a really great connection to some of what Renee was sharing. We can get very caught, and this is not unique to WASA in any way, shape, or form, in this cycle of, and I'm not going to call it a vicious cycle, but some might call it that, of adopting new resources, adopting a different assessment, and thinking that that's going to address the needs. And you're right, it's almost like taking a step back and recognizing we've done that. We've done that and that for a long time. So what is it that we're going to layer on top to get at results for all kids, to get at a feeling of empowerment and engagement for all kids and all staff? Anything additional to add to that from the elementary perspective, Joelle?
As I was reading this chapter, the whole person, I really just think it's important to just identify what the student's strengths are. They're so unique, and each student is just individual on their own. And so when we think about math and writing and reading, we have all these test scores and everything. Those are important, yes, sure, but we also need to focus on the student and what they can bring to the table individually. And then once we are able to do that, then as a whole school, then we can celebrate those strengths and encourage and empower those students to be a part of the school community and stand up as leaders. And then the whole lot of imagination piece of just taking what you already have in place and just using that to be the foundation to move this program forward. And actually, I don't like to use the word program, as this chapter said. It's not just another program, it's a process. You're really taking what you already have in place and moving it forward to be something that'll be really great.
Great. Thank you all. We're going to conclude today's session with a brief video clip that really looks at this concept of engagement, which is where we started the discussion today. And it looks at it through the eyes of an educator or through the eyes of a teacher. As you watch, I'd ask for you to really think about words or phrases that resonate with you when you think about being part of an environment that looks like this, that sounds like this. The video clip also concludes with a question, a very open-ended question, and I hope that your answers fill you with the same sense of hope and enthusiasm that my answers fill me with. So thank you all for your attention today, and we'll see you for chapter 2.